Hello. So I'm with Timothy.
Timothy, yes.
And Robert.
Robert.
Do you want to introduce yourselves or do you want me to introduce you? I had that whole conversation with you about introducing you and now I'm like, who's doing it?
Oh, I feel like we can introduce ourselves.
Okay, introduce yourselves.
So I'm Robert. I've been friends with Elizabeth for ages now. And ages. And yeah, that's who I am. Keep it simple.
Robert and I give the best hugs to each other.
Yes.
We make other people uncomfortable. Our hugs are so good.
And I love them.
We walked in this morning and got a hug from Robert and Timothy, and then all of a sudden we were just like, we should just cuddle instead of
Yes.
It's like, no, we're gonna talk on the podcast today.
Maybe afterwards.
Yeah. And then Timothy.
My name's Timothy, and I've known Elizabeth, I guess, a brief time, like 2 years now.
I feel like it's been longer than that. I have no idea,
My
honestly.
sweet Z-Beth.
Oh, I love that you call me Z-Beth, by the way.
Well, I don't know. It's because you're so rad.
I actually told a friend of mine who calls me E-Beth that you call me Z-Beth. I was like, by the way.
That turns you into Easy Beth.
Wow. Y'all
Easy
picked up on that
Easy
right
Beth
away.
symbol.
Seriously, y'all picked up on that right away. You're like, oh, Easy Beth. Great.
That
Thank
says
you.
everything with your Polly.
Thank you.
She's Easy Beth.
I'm rethinking having really good friends on my podcast. Oh my god. No, the reason that I have y'all on my podcast, we've already talked about this, but just to introduce it to the listeners, is because we're having this amazing conversation last week, like we do, about is it?
It's wonderful.
Good. Okay, good. Timothy really likes the coffee that I made. Mm-hmm. Brought to you by Costco. Because I'm cheap as fuck.
Organic cane sugar.
Yes, brought to you by my roommate. Oh my god. Yeah, but we were talking last week about coming out, and we've all come out in different ways at different times in our life. And
some of us multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. All of us multiple times for different things. Yeah, exactly. And
God, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it's just like our experiences. Because, we started talking about it originally because Timothy, you and I were like, oh, we're coming out, like I'm coming out as, pansexual, queer, and I'm 30. And so I'm like navigating that world like a little bit later. And I say a little bit later because some people come out like when they're, 50. I was gonna say like 50, but
Hey,
but
some
true.
people even younger though.
But some people like way younger. Yeah, exactly. So there's also like coming out at different times and stages in your life. And I think what we were talking about was how people have known us one way, like for our whole lives. And then we come out as something else, and then it's like kind of navigating that whole world of letting people in your life know, like everyone in your life know.
Like I've been living as a gay man for 15 years, and now I'm coming out as trans, and it's, very unique.
Yeah. Well, and how many people have you told or talked about it?
I've been really open about coming out to whoever, whenever. As I do, I'm very outspoken, and I'm like, if you have anything to say, please say it.
That's like Robert's face. He's like, yup.
I feel like a lot of...
He doesn't give a shit.
I really give no shits, and I welcome adversity sometimes. So, but I think that a lot of people aren't super surprised. But, they've always seen me as very feminine or recognized me that way. But I think the actual act, they're like, you're going to transition? And I'm like, yes, mama's going to have tits. Like,
Are you excited?
I'm so excited for my movies.
They're really great. Speaking of someone who has boobs,
I'm without.
I've already
do love my
decided
boobs.
that I'm constantly going to be like, someone has to have a hand on my tit. Like,
I did tell Tim that I might play with him just a little bit, just to see.
I've been 30 years without. So.
Oh my god.
Up and down.
Motorboat.
With your permission, of course.
Right.
Yeah, consensual motorboating.
Yes, of course. May I motorboat your new breasts, please?
Just fucking motorboat each other.
All day.
Oh my god, that's hilarious.
What I thought it was funny too, or interesting, because Tim, was playing with terminology around his gender and also around his name, and he was like, well, Robert, you in your time you can call me whatever you'd like, and I was like, I just refer to you as Tim, and so when you have a new name, like, that'll be that. There's gonna be no gender attachment to it at all.
We just kind of looked at each other. We were sitting there on the couch, and he's like, well, I've just always called you Timothy, and I stopped for a second, and I was like, yeah, you've never really given me a gender. God, what kind of friend are you?
A really good one.
I say, oh yeah, well I guess we can introduce y'all's friendship too.
Oh sure.
Yeah.
Timothy and I have been friends for 11 years now.
Best friends for 11 years.
Excuse me, best friends for 11 years. We didn't really have to come out to each other about our gay sexual orientation.
No, we met gay.
Yeah, but then as Timothy came out as trans, I wasn't really.
Which has been pretty.
It didn't really have any impact on me. I was just like, okay, cool. Well, you're still my best friend at the end of the day. So, breasts, no breasts, it doesn't really matter to me.
I always love to bring this up when I sat down with Robert, and like Robert and I do like emotions, but when like I started to get like teared up and whatever, and I said, Robert, I was like, the biggest thing for me is, and I'm getting all blah, and I was like, Robert, the biggest thing for me is, can I even fucking survive this? And he, without hesitation, was like, I bet you got this. You cannot fake that candor. He's like, nah, I bet you got it.
Well, and I also feel like that's such a Robert thing to say too. Robert's like a very, I call that like the Midwest mom. Just like, you're fine.
You're all right.
Are you dying? Are you bleeding? You're fine.
I know what it's from.
He's like, if anybody can do this, you can.
That's so, and also that's really sweet though, because
it was really the most powerful reassurance that I had felt, and at that point, I had not felt up until that point sure about myself, and so when that happened, like, of course, we laughed our asses off for 30 minutes, but at that point, I felt such strength just from that amount of candor, and
It's like, well, he believes in you. Like, he knows that, like, you're gonna be fine. Because you're amazing.
I'm such a fucking lady.
I'm gonna buy you a t-shirt.
Yes.
I just imagine it like a pink tank top with like gold and sparkles. Like, I'm such a fucking lady.
Yeah, such a fucking lady.
Well, I think too, like, having giving other people strength when they come out is probably the most important thing you can do for somebody who is coming out.
Yeah.
Because it does show them that you care, that you love them, and that regardless of how they want to express themselves or how they need to be in the world,
or regardless of how much of it you understand right at that moment, you can still support someone prior to further educating yourself about what that is.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's really perfect that both of you said that, because, Robert, in your experience of coming out, that would make a lot of sense that for you, having that support right away, or having someone right away be like, no, you've got this, is something that was missing for you when you came out.
Yeah. So my coming out story, I was outed yeah. I was outed in high school in a very small town in rural Nevada. And I didn't really get any of the support that I needed during that time. Because even the people that were kind of trying to support me weren't really, I didn't think they were doing a really great job at the time, or maybe just not understanding what needs I needed to be met by those people when I was like, oh yeah, I am gay, and I kind of agreed with the people that knew. Unfortunately, it kind of went downhill because of backwater politics, and so during that time, it wasn't
very acceptable.
No, it wasn't acceptable. It was pretty rough.
Tolerance was pretty low.
And so I didn't really need to come out again after that. But there was, I guess, when I moved to Seattle, a certain amount of gay awakening that happened.
What do you mean by that?
Like, I was in a state that I could now express however I needed to express myself. And being gay wasn't such a taboo.
Right. Yeah, being gay out here is kind of like neat.
Yeah, it's like, cool, great.
Your shirt is blue and you are gay. Cool.
Yeah, done. And then in 2008, I had to come out again as HIV positive, and that was, coincidentally enough, a similar experience of not having a lot of support, of constantly people like, well, are you okay? Have you eaten today? Like, I was like, I'm fine. Like, really, I'm like, it was rough, but like physically I was fine. It was just the backlash of stigmas that can be attached to any sort of coming out. And I find if you're not really in a position to get support that you need, it can be a lot more difficult.
Well, and then the people with well intent, but literally zero educating themselves on the reality.
It's that kind of goes with what I think about that is like when people are like, oh, are you clean or dirty, when they're talking about your STI screening. This happens a lot in the gay community, especially for men. Like on Grindr, it'll say, oh, well, I'm looking for clean, mask, blah blah blah, and what they mean is disease free.
Oh.
And so that terminology,
right, it like automatically makes it like gross and like unaccepting and condescending. Yeah, totally. That sucks.
And that could be the same thing with trans and various other ideas of coming out of like there's this ideology that you are supposed to be clean. You're supposed to be particular one way, and then I try to think to myself, I was like, do these people live a life that's actually real? Because like that's not how the world works. I was like, what? It's 1 in 2 people have herpes?
Right.
I was like,
yeah.
And it's the fact of these people not educating themselves on not only their own health and practices, but also trying not to turn a blind eye to other people's plight.
Right.
Just not being mindful of the terminology that they use and how that is received by someone.
Like what kind of impact your word has on
associating dirty or filthy with someone being positive is, that's just awful.
Yeah. Well, and I was just gonna say like how that affects dating and like meeting people and like being able to like put yourself out there and.
Well, it's like, so there's a space on these dating apps that you can tell the world if you are positive or not.
Yeah.
And I choose not to. And the reason I choose not to is because, in my perspective, it's nobody else's fucking business until it has to be their business.
Yeah, totally.
Meaning there's an exchange of fluids, there's sexual whatever. But until then, like and there's no really easy way to tell somebody you're HIV positive. And I've told it for...
Right, but because I know like you are really great about telling people, before like when you start dating someone that because we've had conversations about, okay, well, I'm really interested in this person and I think that it's going to get physical and now I have to have this conversation with them and I know that even in me having those conversations with you that you're kind of always in different spaces with it. Like sometimes you're like super empowered and you're like, fuck it, I'm fucking awesome. Like, doesn't even fucking matter. And then sometimes you're just like, do I have to? Like, do I have to have this conversation? Right. And then I'm like, yes.
Well, that's the truth. You have always been really, really good
You've always been so good about telling people. Yeah.
But I have definitely also witnessed when it's been very hard for you. Because,
Well, because I always run that risk of like, is this person going to like me afterwards? Are they going to love me afterwards? Are they going to find me attractive afterwards? And it's not that I find myself to be insecure in those subjects or those descriptions, but that does run in the back of your head. It's like every time I date, I mean everybody does, but I feel like every time I date, I run the risk of somebody learning about my HIV status and then not wanting to pursue anything, friendship or otherwise. And then for me, I'm like, well, fuck off then. But that ends, and like I end up losing potentially really great people. But I also realize that I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to be comfortable with my status.
Yeah.
Like, if you're uncomfortable with me coming out as gay, with me coming out HIV positive and talking about it, that has nothing to do with me or my person.
Yeah.
I don't feel like we're here to educate people, especially in 2019. I was like, log on to Google, type in HIV, and you will find more information than I could probably ever provide.
Right.
Now I do feel like we have a certain amount of responsibility to each other to communicate about those things.
Yeah.
But educating somebody is different than communicating.
Well, that's yeah, because that's always been kind of a interesting question for me as well, because I know that, and this can apply to like anything, right? Like regardless of coming out as like gay or queer or HIV positive, but just like when you're in part of a community that's like less understood or less known about, or like has those like stereotypes attached to, I've always prescribed to, if someone asks me a question and they're asking me a question because they like really just don't know and they want to know and they're trying to like educate themselves about it, like I don't have a problem with that.
Totally.
Right?
That makes me happy.
That makes me happy. And I
feel honored to educate them.
Yeah, and I feel really good that they're wanting to know. But I do know that some people, when they're asked questions or asked like particular questions, that they get really upset, really offended. Like, I don't have to educate you. That's not my job. Blah, 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 blah. And I see both sides. Like, I get it. But at the same time, it's like, if someone's ignorant to an issue and they really are like trying to like understand, then it's like, okay. And you can also say, and by the way, and I've said this to people before too, where someone's asked me a question about being polyamorous, where I'm just like, okay, just to let you know, that's a really offensive question.
Right.
And I'll answer it because I think that this is actually what you mean by that. Like, this is what you're trying to get at.
Right.
But just to let you know, like, if you ask someone else that question,
they might not be as responsive.
I'm letting you know I'm being really nice to you right now. Like,
Well,
really trying.
And the truth about that is people are cognitive enough that most people are very aware of how they're asking these questions and if they're going to be offensive. It's very difficult to be so oblivious that you don't know that you're being, condescending or borderline condescending. If you rehearse in your head, like the question that you're going to ask, if you rehearse that a few times in your head, you can get it down pat to where you're not, most likely not going to hurt someone's feelings and be received well. That's just, for me, I feel like that's just a matter of slowing down for a second and thinking, how would you like to be spoken to about it? And I feel like most times if you do that, like you'll get some great answers.
Right, absolutely.
And I think as far as like people, it's our responsibility to one another to educate people. And I am always like ready and willing to sit down and talk about it and give details and educate, because one, it makes me happy that people are reaching out to try and educate themselves about subjects that they don't know and otherwise would not be able to get information on, but also so that we can be closer as people, so that they can go on to tell other people how to use terminology and what context is best and things like that.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense too from like where you've come from as well, is that where you've come from in coming out is that people aren't educated on it, and also something that you've said is that are willingly ignorant to it, where it's like willingly trying to not know about
what's easier.
It
keeps their little existence intact.
Right, it's like they're holding their claws on their ignorance and bliss. Like
and I don't know if you want to like delve into a little bit more about, because we're kind of speaking like vaguely. So I don't know if either of you want to delve into like more detail of like where that's coming from, and like, because Robert, in like you being a stand for that people like are accepted, and that people are, what we were saying is that when someone comes out, that you immediately are just like, you've got this.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Timothy, where you're coming from, where it's just like the willingness to be educated. And I think that makes perfect sense with your background. So if you want to like dive more into like your background and like where you're coming from with that.
Yeah. I have a good example of this. So my grandmother is obviously from a different generation, has internet, has cell phones, has all these things. And the first question I always get when I'm like, oh, hey, I have a cold, she was like, well, Robert, is this about your HIV? And it's not the fact, like, and we have an okay relationship, and it's not the fact that she's asking about it in that way. It's just like, Grandma, not everything in my life, I'm not this walking around positive individual with just a bunch of HIV running around my body. Like, I'm not some HIV ribbon walking around with 2 eyes and a mouth. Like, that's not what this is. Mm-hmm. And yet, no matter how many times I've communicated to her, like, hey, this is how I would like to be communicated around this, she outright refuses. And even in that moment, I try to take a moment and be like, okay, how can I educate this person around all of her biases so she can still understand, regardless if it's for me or not, like for other people that she might come in contact with. And so for her particularly, I'm just like, Grandma, look, you have feigned ignorance for a very long time and you still do it now. And go Google something. I was like, the next time, and I told her this respectfully, and I was like, the next time you have a question about my HIV, about me being gay, or any of that sexuality, go into Google, do a little bit of research, and then come out with me with more up-to-date information and more openness, and we can definitely have a conversation around it. Mm-hmm. With still being respectful to her particular religion, but there has to be this amount of like you were saying earlier, like the way in which you ask somebody about it makes all the difference whether that other person is going to choose to educate you or to shut you down.
Really, it does, because also you see the effort that they've already put into making, like, trying to make sure that they're somewhat a little educated, so you know that they're coming to you with some form of sincerity. I mean, when I can tell that you've already kind of read up on some things, of course you still have questions and you don't understand, but I can tell that you've put in a little bit of effort. Mm-hmm. I can respect that, and I kudos to you. I'm like, oh my God, yes, I will tell you anything, ask me anything, because you've already came at it with a sincere, I want to know attitude, and done a little bit of your own homework.
Yeah. Well, especially like depending on who is coming to you with those questions too. Right. Because it's just like, if it's someone in my family, then, which my family doesn't often ask me questions about like being poly, and I just came out as like pansexual queer, so who knows?
They don't ask because they're like, she will tell us.
We just sit and wait.
It's Elizabeth. She'll tell. It's fine. We'll find out.
It'll eventually come.
Mom.
And then we'll talk about yoga after.
Yeah, that's right.
Didn't your mother ask you like how the weather was when you told her?
No, she asked me about yoga.
Oh, she did ask you about yoga. That's
I was like, Mom, I was at Brandy's house and I was sitting on her bed and I was like, Mom, all this stuff. And then I was like, yeah. And the other reason that I called you was because I am dating a woman. And my mom was like, oh, cool. I was like, and she goes, well, she must be awesome because you're awesome. And I was like, she is awesome. And then she was like, okay, great. Well, how's yoga?
Well, and for me, I'm like, that is so waspy.
It's so waspy. My family, that's what I was thinking too, is that my family is very, like, besides the fact that I talk about everything all the time and I can be pretty much depended on to do that.
Ditto.
Yeah.
We don't really give you a choice. It's just like, nah.
Yeah, right. Here are all the things. But my family is like pretty, Midwest. My immediate family is not very religious, but kind of the rest of my family is pretty religious, and so there isn't a lot of discussion around those things. Mm-hmm. I remember, I had even when like I've had cousins get pregnant, like it's just like, oh, that's great, she's pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or
crickets.
we were,
Like no discussion, no
Right.
anything. Okay, well
No
now
details.
no details. Like
Let's
now we
just
talk
brush
about
that on
yeah.
under the-
Now we're moving on. Okay, great. Like regardless of whether it's like within
Right.
a marriage, outside of a marriage, whatever. Like however it
They'll get a
happens.
Christmas
Like
card, but let's not talk about it anymore.
right, exactly. It's just like that's their own business. That's their personal. Da 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 da. We're not going to delve into that. You know, it's very much like talk about sports and the weather, and then
With my family, I always say that the Sizemore superpower is denial. Deny. It's not happening. No, it's not there.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was asking about earlier with your coming out was like the denial from your family.
Oh my God. So I came out really early. I came out as soon as I turned 15.
Did you decide you were like at 15 I will say this?
Well, I had just gotten to a point, like I knew that I was gay, and other friends of mine were gay, and they were coming out, and I was so happy for them and like inspired, but they weren't living in families like mine. Mm-hmm. I was living in a cult level Christianity sect of, religion, and it was very scary to think about coming out and what that would look like for me. Like I had no idea what to expect. I knew that it would be severe, but it was kind of just like Russian roulette. Let's see how it goes. And I came home, or I was at the house one day, and I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I just want to tell you that I'm gay. And she looked up at me and took me to her room, flipped open her Bible, wasn't even looking at it, flipped open her Bible and just started quoting scriptures, and asking me if I wanted to burn in hell forever, and blah, 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 the whole different thing. And I was like, whoa, of course, I wasn't totally surprised because somewhat the reaction that I anticipated. But then later, a few hours later, I was like, okay, I want to go to the mall, like, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, no, the only time you're leaving this house is going to church. And I was like, I take it back. I'm not gay, let me go to the mall.
Oh, no.
But, yeah, so that was a little weird one. And then
also, I know that we giggled, but that's terrible. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It was pretty crazy. I mean, I guess, yeah, it was pretty bad, but you kind of, like, I guess you expect
well,
it.
It sounded like you kind of expected
right.
something along those lines.
I had the shields up, like, okay, I know this is going to be like a bomb fallout, like, huge thing. But the truth of it was that I was a very flamboyant person and child.
No.
From birth. Yeah,
Were
no way.
You?
And
That's
I'm
so
super surprised.
So surprised about
from birth.
Women, his mother's heels and lipstick. You're not flamboyant. You're fine.
Right. Like, like I did my mother's yard. I picked out all the flowers. She used to ask me for fashion advice. Like, I'm like, so
as
Mom,
Robert almost spits out his coffee.
I'm like, so
Also got
Mom,
the bottom of the coffee cup,
you want to draw off of all of my like super wonderful like gay powers, but but you don't want me to be gay. I'm like,
you just want all the benefits
right.
of me being gay
Just,
without
yes.
me sleeping with men.
No, that's not how it goes. But yeah, so eventually, like I kind of like went back in the closet, and like being in the Sizemore superpower of denial, my family was like, okay, like relief, he's gonna go back in the closet. We don't have to talk about it anymore. And then later on, eventually, it just had to happen again, and
well, because that's who you are.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm not much of a hider. But yeah, so, and it was obviously met with much adversity and, thrown out of my home and kind of had to.
When was it? How old were you the second time that you came out?
The second time I came out, I was 16 years old, like almost 16 years old.
Okay, so it's about a year later.
Yeah, about a year later.
Yeah.
The first time was actually I was like 14 and a half, and
okay.
Then like 6 months later is when I was like, okay guys, like I'm gay as Christmas, like, I don't know. Like,
Gay is Christmas.
There's no way around it.
Finding those old Christmases are way in the back of the closet. Bring them to the light.
I just remember my dad like calling on the phone, which my dad had like not even really been a part of our lives, and I'm like, who is this? And so he's like on the phone, like, oh my god, blah blah blah. I can't imagine my son, and then described some sexual act. And while I'm on the phone with him, I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I'm gonna try that one out. Like, and so I was like, okay, Dad, are you done? Like, is that it? And hung up the phone. But yeah. So after that, it was a lot of just like turbulence and taking like, you know, living. I was thrown out of my home, and some my two best friends at the time, they were lesbians and had came out and had both met a lot of adversity as well, and we banded together and took care of each other and fed each other and made it work. And
did you have a place to live? Were you homeless?
we did work out a place to live. We lived we like rented this horrible trailer, but we gay sprayed it. We went in and like cleaned it all up, and we were like constantly picking up furniture off the side of the street. And but we made it our own, and it was a house full of love and acceptance, and we made our own little family. And that's, you know, kind of like people say it all the time, the silver lining, even though it's the silver lining around a big ball of horrible shit. The silver lining is that we get to choose our own family. Yeah. And so that's what we did. And yeah. So...
yeah, that's a lot.
It was a lot, yeah.
Yeah, especially like dealing with all that being super young too. And that was in North Carolina, right?
Yeah, back in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm from.
Yeah.
And then finally, once I got to 19, I packed up my car and just left and drove, like went and I started moving around. And about a month and a half later, I received a really nasty call from my father, another, you know, like talking about me being gay and calling me gay slurs and blah, blah, blah. And once again, I was like, are you done? And he's like, yeah. And I hung up on him. And I didn't speak to him after that for about a year and a half. But the phone call that I made immediately after hanging up on him was to my mother, which up until this point, me being gay had been taboo. Like, no one talk about it. Don't bring it up. Don't ask, don't tell. Let's just act like it's not a thing, and we'll be fine. Like it'll be all right. And so I called my mom, and I was like, this is not how it's gonna be. I'm a person. I will respect you and your religion, your choice of lifestyle. I can respect that without agreeing with it, and you can respect me. And if you don't think that you can, then you're down a son. Like, I'm done. This is the ultimatum. Choose now. And she chose. And, you know, like, it was work. It didn't just happen overnight to where she's like, okay, like, we still work on things today. Yeah. But, you know, that was the catalyst point where, and I think everyone kind of comes to that if you have a family or whatever that you experience great adversity from, that, you know, you either reach that point or you believe that you are worth that point where you command that respect, command and demand it, because that's your right as a person.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And it's really awesome that you did that so young as well. Like, it didn't take until you were like 30, 40, 50 to be like, no, you will respect me, because then you have, you know, all of these years of not. Right? But it really does take that assuredness of self. It's like, no, this is how I will be treated. Right. You know, this is how I will be treated by you. This is how I will be treated by every single person. This is my expectation. Right. And I think that, you know, I think that you can draw that like hard line of like, you will treat me like this or I'm not going to put up with it. Right. And then being like really like you said, like super upfront about it. Just being like, yeah, you will treat me like this or you're down a son, which sounds really harsh, but it's also sounds like something that you had to do just for yourself and just for like like you said, your right as a human being and how you get to be treated.
Yeah, a testament to your self-worth. And sometimes you have to illustrate it that way for people because they don't get it any other way. You have to give them that drastic, like, hey, this is what it's going to be. But, you know, also in giving, like, it sounds really harsh, and it was harsh to give, you know, my mother that ultimatum and put her on the spot. But it was appropriate. It had to happen. I also, you know, sat with myself and remembered to be compassionate.
Yeah.
No, it's not okay for my mother to speak condescendingly about, you know, me being gay. No, it's not okay for my mother to remind me that I'm going to hell and whatever else. But it is okay for me as a person to take the time to understand where she is.
Yeah.
You know, like, it may not be right and I may not agree with what she believes or how she thinks, but sitting back and trying to understand that this is hard for her too. You know, like, this is, you know, just a really big deal for her as well as it is for me. So it helped me to still demand that respect for myself, but also be compassionate for her ability as a human to wrap her head around it and give her a break.
Yeah.
Here and there.
No, that's awesome. That's amazing. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is, you know, when you get upset about, and I say you like the royal you, gets upset about people asking questions, that you can be, so not just like with the people that you love, but that also does show a level of love to your mom and a level of love to people where you can demand the respect for your own self, but also have compassion for wherever people are at and wherever their understanding is at as well.
Well, and I know a lot of people have, I have a lot of friends that have just cut ties completely with their family, which, you know, like, some people have to. For you to begin to feel more healthy and, you know, more personal fortitude within yourself, they have had to cut ties completely with their family. And the only reason that I never reached that point is just for my personal journey is that, you know, my friends would ask me, why do you even talk to them? Why do you still let them do this to you? Like, and the reason is because I believed in the long term. Like, I believed in putting in the work, and I believed in, you know, like, it wouldn't always be this way. And that belief has gotten me to where I am today. And my mother is, you know, one of my best friends. My siblings are my football team. Like, they're on my side, along with Robert.
That's right. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's like, and Robert and I kind of wanted to have you kind of weigh in, because that's what we were talking about was, you know, how, where you come from is that you want people to be educated about it, and you, like, want to put in that time and that work with people. And it makes total sense, because it's like, that's where you came from. It's just like, okay, you know, you had a family that just, like, didn't know and wanted to not know, you know, about it.
Right.
And not from a place of, like, the first time that I told my mom that someone told me that I was going to hell, and I was told I was going to hell because I was an atheist, not because of my sexual orientation, but I have been told I was going to hell because of that too.
I have a lot of reasons for going to hell.
Lots of reasons.
I'll see you there.
Why am I going to hell?
I'll stay with some seats. I'll have margaritas. It's fine.
Thank you. Appreciate
It's not even
you.
that hot down
We
here.
have
It's fine.
We're not even going to have to wait in line.
It's like, I know. I got a party bus. It's fine.
There's VIP parking outside. It's fine. I talk to the devil. We're all booed up. It's fine.
It's totally fine. But the first time that I told my mom that someone else told me that I was going to hell, which, you know, the first time that I had that conversation with my mom, I was 19 or something like that, like 19 or 20. And people had been telling me that I was going to hell since I was, like, in middle school. So I was pretty cool with
You're
that.
like, all right, cool.
I
I
was
guess
just like,
tell us where I'm going.
You came to terms.
I
You
was
knew
like-
your destination.
I was like, yeah, thanks. Thanks, already know.
Yeah. See you there, boo.
But it had gotten to the point where, you know, this person told me that I was going to hell, and we were like really good friends, right? And then I told him that I was an atheist, and being an atheist is also like, you could talk about coming out as like being an
Well,
atheist.
there's a whole bunch
as
of
well.
different coming out. It's just
Right.
it's not just around sexuality.
Right, it's not just
Or
around
gender
sexuality.
expression.
Yeah, exactly. And anyway, and I just mentioned casually that I was an atheist, and because at that point it was a pretty well-known fact about me. And he just looks at me and goes, oh, Elizabeth. He's like, but you know that you're going to hell, right?
Like
he was
horribly misfortune.
like he was so it was almost sweet. It
Concerned
was
for
probably like the sweetest way that I've ever been told that I was going to hell, because he just so like, you could just see like all of the love and compassion and concern and upset. It was so sweet, and that's why I'm sorry, that sounds condescending on my part, but
Right, and that is in no way to be condescending on religious belief. Like, I am totally all for however you identify spiritually.
yeah.
Like, that is absolutely fine. Just, you know, remember not to be condescending of other people identifying differently spiritually or not at all.
Or not at all, exactly. But it was very sweet, and that's why, and it came from a total place of love. Like, you know, he's like a good friend of mine, and it just came from this total place of like, oh my God, Elizabeth, I am now very concerned for your soul. And I was telling my mom that, and my mom got super upset that someone told me that I was going to hell.
As mothers do.
Yeah, right? I mean, she's like, no. Like, not that she doesn't think, I mean, if there is a hell, my mom is very clear that I am going there, and she'll be there as well, so it's fine.
Where most of us want to go.
Like, we're both, it's fine. And but that someone would like say that to her child. Right? And so then we had a whole conversation about being open about who you are, regardless of what people think about it. And one of the things that I said inside of that conversation, I was also talking to my dad. My dad was involved in the conversation as well. And one of the things that I said was about being so open and like out loud about like who I am and what I believe, and not that I want other people to believe what I believe, but just so that, you know, we all understand one another. And same with this podcast, where it's like when you talk about something, it then validates people's experiences that might not get validated, you know? And so
well, honestly,
yeah.
It is way more painful to not be super visible and transparent than it is to just be like, hey, this is me. Go ahead and digest that. Like, process it however you need to. But it really, like, it's so much more work, and it's so much more painful to try and navigate keeping it in or keeping it a
not
secret.
saying something,
Not
knowing who knows what.
Right.
Yeah.
All the not knowing who you can trust and uneasiness, all of that is just so much more deprivating on yourself.
Yeah.
Wrong word maybe. But
I know what you mean.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's like when you start speaking that, even if people don't, and your story illustrates it really well, where it's just like, even if people don't receive it well at the time,
It gives you
it's like
personal
eventually
power.
it gives you personal power, and there's the possibility that eventually they will understand. Like, even if they don't understand it in that moment, or even next year, or even 5 years from now, like, it gives that possibility and that opening for people to be, you know, because in my life, like, coming out as atheist, I guess, or coming out as being polyamorous, or coming out as being pansexual and queer, it's like, you know, people kind of, the other great thing about being open about who you are and your own self is that it kind of filters people in your life. It's like, then the people who aren't okay with that don't hang around.
They'll kind
of just take their own self out.
Robert and I say, if you're gonna have a problem, have it now.
What I think that's why I'm always so forward and open with how I communicate, because I was like, look, if there's an issue, we're gonna get it out right now.
I love that about you.
Let's have a communication about it. Let's talk about it. Like I'm all down to hear it. Like, and I'm more than happy to like move boundaries around or whatever. But even around this topic, you know, the transparency, like Tim said, is something really important, because then that other person who you're speaking to, they know where you stand, and there's no questions on that stand.
Yeah.
And they're like, and you know, we still get questioned about it, but we know where we're coming from and how we're operating in that space. Right. And so now I'm like, now you have a choice, like, make one.
I've always thought that how in
like
your face I am about my lifestyle or whatever. My brother told me one time, he was like, man, he's like, I love how you do that. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, you don't even give people a choice. He's like, you're just like, this is me. And I was like, well, Luke, I was like, the reason that I'm that way is because
well, Luke.
I'm like, well, Luke, the reason that I'm that way, one, is because I'm not giving you a choice. You don't have a choice. This is me.
You don't have a choice on who I am. I am who I am, regardless of how you feel about it. Yeah.
It makes people a little uncomfortable. And the reason that little bit of uncomfortable is key is because people have to get a little uncomfortable before they start asking the questions that really matter.
Yeah.
That's what sparks it. It's like, whoa, this makes me uncomfortable. Why?
Right. No, that's so brilliant, though. That's so awesome.
What your mom and Chris say the other day, they're like, oh, Robert doesn't discuss, he dictates. And
they're not wrong.
To separate that a little bit between like dictatorship and communication. I think the reason I end up dictating more often about topics of this nature or problems that need to be resolved quickly and effectively is I don't have time for all the shit. So it's like, let's just cut it all out, like all the stories, all the excuses, all the him and haw, and it's like, bam, bam, bam. That's not easy. Okay, great. Everybody on. Okay, done. Let's get the problem solved. And then we can go on and kind of have more expression around that later. But sometimes like you have to like with boundaries of when people ask you about it.
You have to come in like a wrecking ball.
I kind of like you kind of have to like here's that wall, and you can choose to cross through it. Or you don't. And if you don't, I'm not going to think anything more negatively about you because of that, because we do understand that not everybody is in that same space.
That's your path, that's your journey.
And so, like, but it weeds out the problems. Or the quote-unquote, like, not problems, but it weeds out the indifference that you might find.
Yeah, there's no like wishy-washiness.
No,
and that's where the loss of power is in anything. Like that's where the loss of power is in that kind of like wishy-washiness.
Mm-hmm. Well, the loss of love, of self-expression.
Yeah, love, self-expression, connection, like the freedom to just like well, and that's what both of you have kind of spoken to that. It's just like the freedom and like the relief and the peace of mind that you're just like being yourself. And there's because it's so cluttering and anxiety ridden to try to not be yourself, that when you are, that when you're just being yourself,
or to navigate when you're living a double life, when you're not living a double life, when you have to omit things, when you don't have to admit things.
Right.
You're a double agent.
It's just more efficient to be like, blah, for all of you, here it is.
And that's why I do what I do.
Right, exactly. Well, I think that's why all three of us do that. That was like one of the reasons why I wanted all three of us to talk, because I was like, we all kind of do it the same way.
Right,
We're just like,
we have,
this is what it is.
We have
there you go. You're welcome. Wrap it a little present, give it to you.
We have three very different like journeys and stories and like completely different ways of coming out and reasons for coming out. But that one thing that we all share is that we're very, almost forceful, like.
I would like to call it self-assured.
Self-assured.
Yeah, straightforwardness.
Straightforward. I think I get where it could be forceful. I get that. But,
I get called an asshole a lot.
Well, over my experience, I've learned that when I started coming out to people or like going to parties and whatever else, I had mainly straight friends. I grew up in the punk scene and whatever else. So when I would be around a lot of straight guys that had met for the first time, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is my gay friend Tim," because I was always the gay friend Tim.
Gay friend Tim.
And which was fine because it goes along with me like immediately put it out there. And somebody would be like, oh, just don't hit on me. And I'm like, honey, don't flatter yourself. But so I learned over time that a lot of times those people who were, like borderline homophobes, they, like would start to like get really uncomfortable and,
that
and maybe
uncomfortableness
want
that
to
you're
say
talking about,
condescending things or whatever. But if I came in guns blazing, flame on, like, mama's here, then it kind of shocks them just enough to be like, to keep that condescending, negative, like, they're not as sure of themselves as they would be to like, make condescending remarks or whatever else. They're like, oh, wow. And then usually most of those guys that were borderlining homophobes ended up being my best friends and people that have literally stood up and took blows for me. Like when people have tried to gay bash me or whatever, it was those guys that were originally, homophobes that had now come to understand because of my willingness to educate them and to, be lenient about some of their terminology and not knowing. And, once they're educated and stuff, they find love in it. Like it changes them. And, it's magical to see.
Yeah. Well, and especially because it is that's really beautiful because it really does point to most people aren't necessarily there's just the fear of the unknown, right? Like, it's not you, and it's not even necessarily being gay or being an atheist or being polyamorous or,
So
being
all the
positive.
material
Like,
you have to go off of is stigma.
Right, exactly. It's just the fear of, like, the unknown or exactly, like, the stereotypes that you've already heard of. It's the uneducated part of it that breeds that. And so, at least that's, like, my thoughts on it. And then once people do, like, that unknown becomes a known, then what's there is the love and connection and all of that. And Robert, you look like you were gonna say something.
So I had a thought on educating other people. So when I was outed, I didn't know what gay meant.
Okay.
I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't realize it wasn't just sex based, because that's kind of the hyper focus on it is like, anal sex. That's what the sin is.
Yeah, that's what being gay is. Yeah.
And so for me, like, it wasn't. There was almost no communication around it at all. Now at the time, my mother was also highly addicted to drugs, and so I was trying to navigate not only being outed in a small town, but also navigating supporting my mother through her drug addiction when I was like 16. And because I wasn't able to understand or have the education on what it meant to be gay, then I experimented in the only way I knew how, and that was with my body. And then later what happened is, like, because of that expression that I was trying to do, I ended up becoming positive because of that expression. And now that's to take it back point. To, like, educating is, like, if I had been educated from, like, a gay elder, if you will, about, like, hey, this is what this life could be for you, a lot of that probably wouldn't have happened. Right. And I remember too, like, when I was outed, I was gay bashed. I was held at gunpoint. I was pistol whipped. Like, I was beaten. And when I came home to talk to my mother, the only person that I felt like I could talk to, all she said was, "This puts me in a bad position," because she sold drugs to the guy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and so I just wanted to hide all of that back inside, because I don't want that to happen again.
Right.
So how do I express myself around violence?
Yeah.
How do you express yourself, and how do you help other people understand, like, where you are if you don't know where you are, if you don't get that education as somebody who's coming out?
And I encountered the same thing because, like, in a religious family, it's like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. I didn't really know what gay was either, like, and then coming out, you have no resources or knowledge to go off of what it's supposed to be like, or blah blah blah. And so I think that's why a lot of people are like, oh my god, gays are so promiscuous and whatever. But
well,
it's because a lot of us, when we come out, we're not allowed to talk to anybody about it. There's nobody there to tell us, hey, you don't have to be promiscuous or whatever. The only way that we are able to, like, educate or like find ourselves or figure out what it is we go with our bodies first. And especially if we come out at a young age, we're full of hormones, like and that's all we know to do is like the act of it.
Yeah.
So for an example, recently I was able to spend 4 days with 3 older gay men, 50s and above, and it was so relieving to be around other people that understood what HIV meant. They lived through the crisis. They understood that I am just going to be myself. They didn't objectify. They didn't give a shit. I mean, I literally walked around in tiny shorts all 4 days around this pool, and they didn't care. And it was so nice because I didn't have to explain anything. I didn't have to educate anybody. I can just express. And then you get these kind of matriarchs in that society that you can reach up to, like, hey, I'm dealing with this problem. How do we communicate through this? How do I, what are some resources I can do? Like, how do I help myself so I can help others understand what this is? And a lot of us, we don't get that. We don't have that opportunity. And so, like, even when I moved to Seattle in 2007, like, I was still experimenting with my body. Because I didn't have any groundwork for it. It's like, okay, great, I'm gay, I guess. What the hell does that mean? I like boys. Okay, what does that mean? Like, is that just sex-based? Is that romance? Like, it was a very kind of complex feeling to have when you yourself aren't educated. Sometimes we can't educate other people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And, like, first of all, Robert, thank you so much for sharing that and, like, being open and vulnerable. And that's the first time that I've heard that. Right?
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You're welcome. We can cry afterwards.
Yeah.
All of us together.
I thought about it. I was like, I feel like this is a good time to cry.
Tear break.
But tear break. Pause the recording. Tear break. No, but really, like, thank you for sharing that. And I think that it does shed light on one of my questions at the very beginning, which is, why do we get so upset when people ask us questions? And I think that answers part of that really beautifully, because sometimes we don't.
We have no idea.
I was like, I'm frustrated because I don't know how to tell you this.
You tell me.
Let's find out together.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. I was like, they're like, well, what about this gay thing? I was like, I don't know. What does it mean? You tell me. They're like, but you're gay. And I was like, yeah, I got that. And let's talk about it, because I don't know what it means.
Well, and I've talked about this on some of my other episodes, and like being poly is like, I didn't have a word for being polyamorous, like, other than I just loved multiple people, and professional slut, yes. I did, like, I was just like, I called myself a professional slut, and it was kind of like wrecking ball. It was just like, well, now I do this.
Yay, there goes that building.
Yay. Like, and there was a lot of like turmoil,
right.
And just like, and not understanding, and also like wanting to be like really, like, I remember like really wanting to be like proud of myself. I think that's why like the professional slut thing came in.
It gave you a sense of like power.
Yeah, because it gave me a sense of like power and like owning it and just being like, yes, this is how I feel. I don't know what the fuck that means.
Well, and you make it very known, like, you're not going to make me feel uncomfortable about this. Like,
right, exactly. It's like, you can't make me feel bad about it. Like, I spend enough time making myself feel bad about it, so bye. Like,
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that was a lot of the things for me, was like, I really just didn't understand my sexuality to the point where I didn't like myself. Like, I just hated me. Mm-hmm. And when I started to embrace me, I was just like, nobody's gonna make me feel like that ever again. Like, I'm owning my sexuality. I'm owning who I am about it. I'm owning this. Like, yes, I love multiple people. Yes, I want to sleep with multiple people. Yes, I want to do this. I don't know what that means, but I'm just going to go out there and fucking figure it out. Like, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of mine also came from, like, I was severely bullied all the way through school, and, called gay and vag and all the different things. And just super, super severe, up until a point that finally I just snapped. And it was when I came out, and I turned into the opposite kind of an individual that I was kind of an introvert. I didn't talk much. I was, because of all that bullying, I was, pushed down. And when all that happened, my transitional phase, I made a promise to myself. I was like, I will never let anyone make me feel lesser than, or like there's something wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And in my head, my logic was, I will keep the flame so hot that you can't get close enough.
Right. Well, and I think that sorry, Robert, you say what you were going to say first.
Well, I think though, going along with like when I was gay bashed, and then later I was hearing about a bunch of gay bashings that was happening here in Seattle, and I decided to take up martial arts because in my head I was like, I'm never going to be that person again. I'm never going to be put in a situation where I have to be hurt because somebody doesn't understand who I am. Yeah. And now I don't want to go out and like promote violence by any means, but I think the first thing they teach you in that martial arts field is how not to be violent. Yeah. Like how to react calmly, effectively, and to get out of the way. Because I was like, I'm not going to be that person. And then by not being that person who is going to get bashed, I can lead the way for other people to do the same. And however they need to do it, right? Yeah. Just like, hey, you can be as strong as you need to be because you can. And sometimes it sucks, but we have to do that so other people know, like, this is where I stand. And this is what I'm accepting and not accepting. And you can go right the hell off if you don't like it.
And as a testimonial, it provided you what you needed to even save me once.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And Tim wasn't gay back. I don't know.
It was.
What happened? Did you have to fight somebody?
I did fight somebody, yeah.
You fought somebody? When did this happen?
Should we tell the story, Tim? We should tell the story. We should tell the story.
I mean, I think we should.
Now
we have to tell the story.
Okay.
When did this happen? Okay. By the way, when did this happen?
This happened years ago. Years and years ago.
Oh, okay. I was like, what?
Not recently. No. Oh, recently? God.
It's 5 years ago.
It was 5 years ago. We were at this bar. We had been drinking a little bit. I became a little sassier than I normally, more sassy. Long story short, I pissed this group of people off.
Yes.
And our friend Ray was with us, and he was like, "Hey," I believe he expresses himself as male.
Ray tried to usher us around the corner.
Yeah, ushered us around this corner, and there was this in grade up this hill on Capitol Hill or whatever. And then Timothy is down kind of lower on the in grade. Ray and I are a little further up, and I see this person come around the corner and get in Timothy's face.
And I'm trying to diffuse the situation. Like, this guy's like yelling gay slurs and whatever, and like being like violent with his motions, his physical motions. And I was like, hey, I don't know you. We're just trying to leave. Like, please
don't worry about
respect respect my personal space. Please back up. And he dropped his book bag and hit me in the face. And I was just stunned. Like, oh my God, did you actually just hit me? Well, before I could even respond, Robert jumps over me and tackles this guy down the hill, beating the shit out of him.
Oh my God.
And respectfully, he did not, really severely hurt the guy, but he did incapacitate him.
You knocked him out?
He wasn't knocked out, so I hit him a few times. And so he's on the pavement. I've jumped 10 feet over Timothy. This kid is on the pavement. He's half my size. And I hit him a few times, and there's always this little subconscious thought that says, stop. Yeah. You're gonna hurt them.
Right.
So I was like, shit. And by this point, I'm super sober. So I was like, okay. I was like...
There's nothing like getting into a fight that'll sober you up super quick.
I was like, what happened? I was like, what is this? Why is this kid on the floor? I had just seen red and just went for it. And then when I clicked back into reality, I was like, oh, we hurt somebody. So he gets back up probably 3 different times. The first time he gets in my face, says, we don't have a problem. I'm going to fight your friend, faggot, blah, blah, blah. And I was like... light little tap, because by this point I'm conscious enough to be like, okay, I can mitigate how angry I am right now. He gets in my face again. He's like, we're gonna have a problem now. He's give him a little harder shove, and I was like, okay, we're done. I'm gonna go. You're gonna go. And the last time he gets in my face, I shove him so hard he tumbles down the goddamn street before one of his friends grabs him and drags him off.
Oh my God.
And for me, it wasn't just because Timothy's my best friend and I would break the world in half for him, but you don't get to touch somebody because you don't understand their strife.
Right.
just because you don't understand Timothy being gay, or that even if that person identifies as gay male, which I'm not entirely sure, whatever, that you still don't get to attack somebody because of who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And I choose to be a stand against that. Hence why the hell I beat the crap out of him.
Yeah.
Frog leaped over me.
Oh my God, that's crazy. But it really does go back to those decisions that we make. Like, you made that decision, you know, back when you were 16, you were like, this is never going to happen again. And, you know, fast forward, you know, however many years later, and it's like a situation happened, and it's like that trigger just like pops back on where you're just like, no, this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
And then you just go for it, right?
Well, it's
and
one thing, like, it doesn't have to be like, if there's physical contact, I'm all in. Like, outside of that, like, you know.
Well, and I know that you're like not like a fighter. Like, you're not going to automatically jump into like a physical altercation like as soon as it arises. Like, I know that about you, right? And but I think but yeah, it's just kind of like that trigger. And I think that one of the things that I've learned for myself is, you know, in making that decision back when I was like 20, being like, you know, I'm never gonna let anybody, and I think that, you know, Tim spoke to that as well, where it's like you all of a sudden like put this persona on yourself where it's like, okay, so there's taking on who you are and having that healthy persona, like, this is who I am, you know, I'm standing in my own truth, and there's like the healthiness of that. But then there's when you take those stories too far, and you take on that persona of like, no, I will beat somebody up, or no, I will burn my flames so high that like nobody can get close to me, you know. And so I think that, you know, we make these stories as a survival mechanism.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Because you do realize the danger that you're walking through every day.
Right.
On a moment's notice, it could change. You don't know what person you might walk past or who's behind you in line that may flip out.
It sucks that we have to be we have to take that persona on. Like, we don't have to, but we choose to do that because we feel like there's this necessity to defend ourselves
At any moment.
Yeah, at any moment,
because
right.
other people don't understand it.
And I think that at least from my perspective, I think the healthy way to go about it is to recognize that it is a persona that you put on, right? And to stand in your own truth, and to only use that persona like when it's, you know, because then you do start to separate yourself from people like in the opposite way, right? Like, you're like, I burn my flame so bright that like nobody can get close to me. And like for me, it's like I put on such a level of confidence, like borderline arrogance, that it's like I'm not approachable anymore, you know?
Well, and I feel like as time goes on, you learn how to kind of police that with yourself to where it's like, okay, I can be mindful of how abrasively in your face I am about it when I walk into a situation and I know that it's just a bunch of good old boys, like, you know, they're more conservative, whatever. I don't have to be like drag queen status, you know, like feathers.
But even if you want
whatever,
to be, I think that has to be that at some point has to be okay too.
If I want to, I will.
Right.
But there's a
but
lot of
not
times
as a level
that
of, not
if
as
I
a way
wanna
of like a defense mechanism,
Yeah,
like as a way,
responsible.
but using that as a choice. And like not using that as just like a have to.
What Tim and I say is that persona, every now and then she pays rent. All the other times she's over there in a box, don't even look at her, leave her the hell alone. But every now and then in our lives, she's forced to pay rent. Like that boy who got beat up at 16, right now at 30, he has to pay rent. That time I was like, I was like, I am not gonna like, you know, and I don't find that to be a problem as long as you don't live within that persona all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like sometimes that arrogance could be really helpful in a certain situation, but you don't have to identify with all of those
it's like
times.
I always know
what
that
we've
that
done is
vicious
we've like
lady's there.
taken it away, put it in a little box, labeled it, and was like, all right, girl, you stay asleep. Like, I can handle all this, but every now and then, so like with my ex-boyfriend, there was a moment that I thought he was going to get violent with me because he just didn't understand me. And I was like, all right, she's going to have to pay rent here in a second.
Yeah, but she's got to wake up and handle this.
But I think that that's a really good way to not. I am not advocating violence, by the way.
No.
Although all of us have been in situations where we have had to act violently. I've been in situations where I've had to act.
I've heard.
We've talked about it.
Our friend Jen uses the best term. She says, "Get like a bear," and that's basically what it is. It's essentially blow yourself up, like, to where you don't have to actually have a physical altercation, but you need to show them, like, hey, like.
Right. Well, it is get like a bear, or like the rattlesnake has like its tail, right? Where it's just like, yo, like shit's gonna get real.
I always give somebody at least one warning. If I like you, you get two.
Yeah.
Right.
Outside of that, like, you don't get any more warnings. I'm like, hey, I know who I am.
But that's in the
I
house
know what I've had to I know what I've had
to
gone through.
Right.
I was like, and that person will come out, and I'm telling you, like, this is the line in which you're gonna have to decide: do you back down, or do you get this bear in your face?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and kind of to escalate it off of the bear scenes, because we could just go on and on and on about how, because like clearly all of us are like very sassy and in your face, and so I'm sure that we have I have tons of stories, and I know that y'all have tons of stories, so
you should just brought two of the scrappiest hoes she knows on her show.
but going back to coming out, what's something that you would give as advice, or something that you would have done differently, or like, and that can be like for the person who is going to come out, or for the people who someone is coming out to, because I think some of it we've already covered a little bit. It's like, let the person be however they're going to be, like, be immediately supportive of whatever that is, and like validate that person's experience. Right, but what's something that you wish that you would have known, or you wish that would have happened, or advice that you would give in coming out? And that can be coming out in any, we've talked about coming out in a lot of different ways, but
I think the major thing that I would want to, if I could be 16 again, I think the major thing that I would want is a space that could give me that sense of community, to know that I wasn't alone. Yeah. So for people who are just coming out, who have not come out and want to, or the people who have come out, having a sense of community with like-minded people who know similar struggles can make your struggle feel valid.
Yeah.
And therefore, within that validation, to say that it's okay that you've had to deal with this. Let us take the rest.
Right. Yeah. You're not alone, and you can survive it.
You have that moment of like, you can take that Atlas-sized boulder off your shoulders, and you can stop climbing.
Share it. You
can just be like, hey, let's dislodge this major part of what you thought this needed to be, and let's discover what it really is for you. But you need that emotional base, because if not, you're just kind of free falling it, and you don't really know which way is up or which way is down. And then, through that, in regards to like HIV, that might have not happened.
Yeah.
If we are there to educate one another, especially in our particular communities, and then as a larger community, then that's where we find progress, we find openness, we find power, we find that those personas don't need to be, because there's no reason to have them.
Well, and if parents, like even parents that aren't agreeing with it, just recognize the reality that, okay, I may not agree with this, but my child has just come out to me as gay. I need to educate myself. That way I can make sure that even though I may not agree with this, thing, my child being gay, I need to make sure that I'm educated enough to keep my child safe, to teach my child how to be safe. What are the risks? That it doesn't always have to, you don't have to use your body to figure it all out. Like, I think that's definitely a big responsibility on parents. But I think my thing, what my advice would be for a come-outer, but if you're really young and you want to come out, or you've been thinking about it, I think that try to remember that you cannot guess how people are going to react, and a lot of times you will be surprised. If it goes really bad at first, don't understand that time changes things. Like understand both sides.
Yeah.
You know, like it being gay, like realizing that for yourself and coming out. Imagine how hard, you know how hard that is for you. Imagine that it is also very, you know, uncomfortable and hard and difficult on the other side of things. It, even though that's not your responsibility or whatever.
As a parent, it is your responsibility. As a parent,
as someone coming out, I'm saying just try to also be compassionate to the other side. Like mine was for like my mother. I knew that my mother loved me, and she lost her mind, and I was kicked out and blah blah blah. But through time, I learned like to be compassionate and look at her side of things. Like, you know, like to have patience.
Because she's been told one thing like her whole life.
Right, and
right.
I guess that my advice would be to, if you can, you know, like I respect everyone's journey and whatever you have to do to be healthy. If you have to cut all ties, by all means, cut all ties. But a lot of times, just kind of be patient, you know, like be patient and be open to talking about it when they seem like they're ready to ask questions or whatever, and maintain your like demand for a certain level of respect. But a little bit of patience can go a long way.
Yeah. Awesome. And I think that my advice is that however scary it might seem, that ultimately it's going to be okay.
Reach out.
Yeah.
Reach out, because we're out here. Your family's out here. And we are the most get behind ferocious family.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do. I find that like in being out and like being myself and speaking my truth, that, you know, I've come across you guys, obviously, and just like the people in my life, because it's true. It's like when you are your true self, the people who are meant to be in your life, like your chosen family, like they'll be there. Yeah. You
right.
know, like that.
I remember when you first told me, like, I'm dating a woman. I was like, okay, that's cool. Like, great.
No, and that's the thing. Well, and the thing about like me, like
I was like, I always knew you was family.
I know. I know. Timothy's like, oh, girl, I knew.
And I was just unfazed.
I know.
Cool.
I actually had one of the people that I dated a couple of years ago. Him and I are still friends, and I was like, oh yeah, and I'm dating a woman, and he was like, oh, and then I said to him, because he's also someone that I have like really deep, like meaningful conversations. You know, people that you can just like delve deep with. Yeah, and I was like, hey, I want to understand like why people aren't surprised by me coming. Like I've like received no surprise, like very, very, very little. Like everyone's been like, cool, how's yoga? Like that has been like, that wasn't just a conversation with my mom. That was like my dad and my brother and like all of my friends and like pretty much everyone that I've come out to. And he goes, Elizabeth, when we dated, I actually thought it was weird that you weren't dating women at the time.
Well, I think
it's like we were all waiting for you to catch up.
We were just waiting for me to catch up.
Well, and I think too, like you've always lived so openly about your sexuality and how you appreciate the fact that sexuality can be expressed in a variety of ways. And from your acceptance of others' variety of sexuality, then you and your friends, I think, maybe find it easy to accept that, hey, Elizabeth is now dating a woman, and we're just like, cool, because she supports everybody else's sexuality. Why wouldn't we support hers?
Yeah, thanks.
And it just Brandy's gorgeous.
And
and you could date a monkey, and I wouldn't give a shit.
Well,
nope, still wouldn't care.
It might take some time.
She'd be like, I'm dating a zebra today. I'm like, cool, Elizabeth, are we gonna get coffee later? She's like, yeah, I'll bring my friend. I'm like, awesome, let's do this.
You know, like me coming out as trans recently, like a lot of my friends that have known me for a long time, they're like, okay, Tim, like.
It was not surprising to me at all.
Right, they're not surprised at all. They're like, you've always been prettier than most bitches I know. And they were like, you know, you've been referring to yourself as mama for like how many years?
You always refer to yourself as some sort of woman, like female, like
Entity,
sort of
yeah.
like, you know, you always say lady or mama or girl or hoe or what, like, you know, whatever it happens to be, but you always refer to yourself that way. And so like I've never like considered you, I've never been like, oh, you know, Tim is trans and I'm just waiting for her to catch up.
Yeah.
But when you did come out, I was like, oh, well, that makes sense.
And I was just like, oh, it's Tim still. Cool.
Well, and then like I thought the cutest thing was when I recently went on a vacation to visit my very southern family. I talked to my sister, which is so amazing. She's probably my biggest ally. I you know, talked to her about it, and I was like, Hannah, like, I was like, I want you to know that this is a safe, non-judgmental space. Like, I want you to tell me exactly how you feel, even if it is in disagreement or whatever. I want to know, like, you know, transparency, how you feel. And she was like, she's like, I think it's amazing. She's like, I had an amazing big brother for 30 years, and now I get to have a big sister.
Oh, that's so great.
It was so sweet.
That is really sweet. No, that's really great. Have you come out to your whole family or just her?
I came out to my little sister first, and because I knew that it would be much easier, and you know, she would be very supportive. And my two brothers, all my siblings have always been like behind me no matter what. They're like, as long as you're happy, as long as you're healthy, we support it. Like, be you, you know, and do your thing. And I knew, like, with going through this, that it might be a little more difficult for my two brothers. Just because they're my brothers, you know, they're guys. They've always seen me as their brother.
Why is it so much that I'm curious about that, because I have another friend who has transitioned, has been a trans woman for ever since I've known them, which is at least 3 years, and they were already transitioned like before that, but they also had a really it really rocked their relationship with their brother. And I'm curious as to like, why is that? Like, why is it so much more difficult for brothers to accept that?
I think it's something about the camaraderie you have growing up as brothers is a little different than growing up and having a sister, because when you have a sister, you're very protective over your sister, you know, like the whole, like, all that heteronormative, like, stuff where it's like, you know, the woman is more fragile or whatever. I think that's the difference there, but, you know, it's just really, it's very complicated with families. And so I think that my approach to it was that I would come out to my sister, have a very good long talk with her, make sure she was fully educated and, you know, behind it. And I came out to my brother's girlfriend, who is queer herself, very, very like trans rights, behind the movement, like open-minded. And the reason that I did that and then didn't explicitly come out to my brothers is because I wanted to give them the space to kind of freak out a little bit. You know, like, I didn't want to put them on the spot. And
you didn't want to come out like guns blazing.
Well,
and
I didn't
like,
want to put them on the spot and then maybe them say things that they would regret later, or like, you know, create a really awkward situation that would have to go down in memory. You know, at least that way they have two, you know, people, my sister and my brother's girlfriend, that have knowledge about it, that have talked with me about it, and can talk with them, almost like a liaison between. That way it gives them a minute to kind of wrap their head around it a little bit, even if it's not like full acceptance or whatever.
Yeah.
They've had time to like sit with it.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I did that with coming out as pansexual and queer. I called my cousin I came out to like my immediate family and I wasn't worried about that. But I was a little bit like more hesitant with my larger family because they are more religious than my immediate family. And like and it was kind of the same thing with like your mom, where it's like I know that I'm not afraid of like someone in my family not loving me anymore. Like I'm not afraid of that, but I'm just afraid of, you know, what it would do with the relationship or like how they would take it, or it's just that it's the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. And I called my cousin Jess first and like came out to her first. And when and the reason that I came out to her first is because, you know, both of us have a connection with each other, and that she was just a really safe space for me to go to. So it was kind of similar, same thing, where it's just like I went to like the safest space first. And that's when we talked about, okay, well, maybe in coming out to the whole family, just to kind of call a liaison in each family, right? Where it's just like, okay, and this is the cousin in this family that I feel the safest with, and so come out to them. And this is like and then kind of and then make it be known that this is an okay subject to talk about. Right. Like, okay, now that I've come out, like, you know, don't hide it. Like, you can tell your parents, like my aunts and uncles, right? Like, we can talk about it.
It can be a conversation.
It can be a conversation, you know, like don't, just because I'm choosing to just call you doesn't mean that I want it to stay between us.
Right. Well, I think that goes back to finding a community, because a community doesn't have to be multiple people. It can be one person.
Yeah.
You know, you can find that community in your cousin, and then that community can help you spread the word of like, hey, this is who I am. And it can lessen the directness, or as Tim said, that fire that you want to come in with sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you're like, okay, now I have the support of these people who also love me and cherish me, and so if there is complication with the rest of the family, these people can help guide them to that understanding, or to that, not even an acceptance, because they don't have to accept you, but there has to be a certain level of understanding. Like, you can have whatever belief you need to have around it, but understand that it's not going to change how I am going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, exactly, when you're kind of like building your allies. Yeah,
you're building that community for yourself, because a lot of us, we don't have that opportunity a lot of the time. And so it's important for us to build our own quote-unquote families, our structures that are like, hey, you're my pillar, and I need you to help me like build this building over here.
And as scary as it may be to be very forthright, transparent, and visible, as scary as that may be, it's key to being able to find those people that, you know, they can't see you unless you make yourself seen.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be really scary at first, but that's how you're going to find those allies and those people that will stand with you, and you'll find them in the most unexpected places.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you too. It's just like the more, and I'll speak to polyamory more just because I've, you know, had to come out as polyamorous more often over the past, you know, 10 years, obviously, than coming out as pansexual and queer.
And I'm sure other girls like have been so nasty about it. She's out there taking all our men.
And then she's taking all women.
Are you greedy?
Pokemon, you just gotta catch them all.
You just gotta catch them all. There's actually, oh my gosh. So I was just thinking about that this morning and preparing for, you know, our conversation today and all this stuff. And really, like, any of the words that describe how you can love as many things as possible, like, those words are me, right? Yeah. Like polyamorous or pansexual, or there's a Greek word, and I might be saying this wrong, but there's a Greek word. It's spelled agape, and I think it's agape. I think that's how you say it, but I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. And I could be saying it for anybody who speaks Greek and knows that word and is like, she's an idiot, I apologize. I don't know how to say that word. But it just means love of all people. Mm-hmm. Like, those are the words that describe me. And yeah, people get, for as awesome as that sounds, it's like, oh, that's, like, in my mind, I'm like, isn't that so cool that you can just like love all the things? And then some people they're like, stop.
You can't have everybody. And you're like, no, I can. They're like, no, you can't. You're like, no, no, but I can't.
I even have straight guy friends that I've been extremely close with, and we've been in, you know, what some people would try to put in a box as a relationship, like, you know, that closeness that is not in any way sexual.
Yeah.
But, you know, they're there for you like a boyfriend would be, and
Yeah.
you know, like, it's all the emotional support and the different things. So love is so multifaceted, and you know, like, it should never have a box that we try to put it in.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a label.
And it's just like, and however, that's really brilliant because it's like however it shows up is perfect. And
allow it to be.
And yeah, just allow it to be. Exactly. There's not a way that it has to be. There's no should about it. There's just, oh, this is how it is.
You're eating everything organic.
You
let your love be organic.
You let your Come on, you fucking hippies.
All the vegans out there.
All the vegans out
So
there.
I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a side note.
Yes.
In regards to HIV.
Yes.
So we've talked about coming out in different periods of your life as different things and whatever different identity is. I find that with HIV, I have to come out again and again and again and
Right.
again. And that can be really difficult without having some support or without having, like, because I have every time I come out as HIV to somebody new, I have to relearn that acceptance all over again.
And you go through all those same feelings.
Yeah.
Because it never gets easier.
Yeah.
Right? And no matter how many advances we have or whatever, it's like either somebody's going to be like, okay, hey, that's not a deal, that's whatever, it's fine, or they're going to have some sort of reaction for that.
Each time you have to prep yourself for possible rejection.
Yeah, and I choose to tell the people that I care about, or when it's necessary, because when you come out to people, even if it's again and again or once, and they really have your back, it becomes a little less challenging. Just a little bit, right? If you have a hard time coming out to somebody and you're crying or whatever, you go over to your friend's house and like, it's cool, Robert, I already know. All of that weight lifts.
Yeah.
And so I don't quite know the point of this tangent, but it's...
No, I mean, I totally get that because, and I'm not comparing like coming out as positive and coming out as polyamorous, but you do have to, as being polyamorous, like you do have to come out like again and again and again and again to like the people that are interested in you or people that want to date you and like all this stuff. And it's also, it gets easier over time.
Yeah.
It gets easier over time because for me, at least from my perspective, in coming out as polyamorous, it really does solidify that the people who are going to be in your life will be in your life, and the people who aren't going to be in your life aren't going to be in your life.
Right.
And because people have taken it all sorts of different ways. Some people are apathetic, some people are upset, some people are confused, some people think that it means one thing when it doesn't mean that thing.
Yeah, they give it a lot of meaning that you
right.
don't give it.
Well, and you can't force anyone, you know, like some people just aren't going to be okay, and you sometimes have to just accept that. I love that line from Memoirs of a Geisha, you cannot push a cart sideways. Like some people, it's just not going to work. And as long as I've found that with some of those people, you can find that mutual level of respect that it's like, I know that you are never going to be okay with this. And you know that you're never going to be okay with it. But we can still respect one another and, not beat each other down or whatnot. Or have this huge negative relationship every time we encounter one another.
Yeah, and going back to, I don't think I actually ended up making this point, but in talking to my mom about the person who was like upset that I was an atheist and like told me I was going to hell and all that stuff, the point was that my dad and my mom and I ended up talking about is that when you are straightforward and when you are speaking truthfully about your experience and who you are, that even if that person doesn't understand it right then, even if they don't like it right then, even if they flat out disagree, at least it's now a conversation that they're having.
There's
like it's something, it's something that they're aware of, and maybe they don't like you were saying, maybe they never accept that. Maybe they never ever ever accept that. Maybe they're never okay with it. But maybe
You've given them the chance.
Yeah, and there is that possibility that maybe, 5 months from now, maybe 5 years from now, that they're like, you know what? Remember that time I had that conversation with Robert? Remember that time when I had that conversation with Timothy? Maybe there was something there that I didn't see. Maybe there's once you put, and that's why I think that it's so important to stand in your own truth and speak in your own truth in a loving and compassionate way. Because if you're just upset with people that they don't understand you, then they're going to stay that way.
Right.
But if you have a level of love and compassion, even if it may sound harsh, like with your mom, that level of love and compassion sounded harsh. It's like, this is who I am, choose.
Right.
Right? But it's like when you come at it from a level of love and compassion, that there's the opportunity for growth.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe if it's not right this second, but like eventually, right?
And don't always.
I was just saying, hold on, let Robert go.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think within that, like, you being able to express your truth and know that is where your truth is, you don't have to be moved on it, and like, it might give somebody else a piece of what you're dealing with. So I recently this guy was like, well, I've never been with an HIV positive person, so I don't know what that means. And in my head I was like, that doesn't mean anything. Like, it's fine. But then in that moment I realized that this person is not to the point of acceptance. Yeah. And acceptance for their life or whatever. And instead of me getting upset by it, I was just like, well, if you want to have a conversation about it, we can. If you don't, then I wish you well. Like, I'm not going to sit here and try to be... I want to help other people understand our variety of coming out and who we are. And to, like, what Tim was saying, like, sometimes they just won't understand that, but that doesn't mean they won't never understand that. Maybe they just don't get that understanding with you, but at least maybe you planted that seed for the next person they run into that's like, hey, I'm HIV positive. Like, oh, I remember I had this guy who was really great, but, whatever. And maybe within that, there can be this unlocking, if you will, of understanding and compassion for the next person.
Right, because
then so we can like pay that forward to a certain extent by holding ourselves to be true.
Right, and then it also breaks down any stigma that they may have around it, right?
Well, because they get to see you.
Yeah, exactly, because it's just like, oh, well, people who are polyamorous or pansexual or atheist or HIV positive or trans, like,
it doesn't make us any different.
It doesn't make, exactly. It's just like, oh, well, I met Timothy and Timothy's amazing, so I can't, so those things that are, those stigmas that are in your mind, like, start breaking down just given by the fact that they've met you and you're an amazing human being. And that could go for any of us, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And that's, to go back again to the guy who was like, oh my gosh, like, you're going to hell, like, he was so upset about it. Like, him and I are still friends. Like, that was 12 years ago, and him and I are still friends. He actually called me a couple weeks ago because he was going to this rally to talk about the Second Amendment, and he is for second, pro-gun, like, all this stuff. Like, him and I are, like, the most opposite people, like, on the planet, right? And he's, like, pro-gun and all this stuff, and he was going to speak at this thing where most of the people there are, like, anti-gun, like, want it to be more like Australia, right? Whatever. And he called me because him and I have a mutual respect for each other, even though we don't agree on things. Like, he respects my opinion and my view and holds my view as valid, even though we don't agree. And so it's not impossible, right? It's not impossible to, like, respect one another and validate each other's experiences and beliefs, even though we don't agree or live the same way.
And that's the thing. It's like, I don't really care. Like, agreeance, non-agreeance, like,
right.
To me, that's a non-issue because, again, if we get to express ourselves how we choose to express ourselves, we will eventually find the people that allow that expression to exist.
Yeah,
and we can do that with mindfulness.
And hopefully pave the way for other people to reach that same acceptance in their time.
Yeah.
And some of them never will, some of them definitely will, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, right? Those are big things for some people to really wrap their head around, of like, wow, she's queer now. Wow, he's a woman. Wow, he's HIV positive now. But to the point of, like, we're all badass, like, these people they'll like, Well, that doesn't matter, because that doesn't, like, we still get to exist
Right.
how we've always existed.
Also, I love chocolate.
Yeah.
It's just like, I'm queer and I love chocolate.
Yeah.
And also I read books. And
I was like, I'm HIV positive and I like going to the gym. And I like tea. I was like, it's just like a list of like, when people are like, oh, well, what do you like to do? I was like, well, I like to live HIV positive. I like to go to the gym. I like boys.
But I really do think that when you can start giving it that level of significance, like your shirt is blue and you're trans. Fabulous. Like
I'm trans, I hate shaving, and I'm terrible at makeup.
We can talk about that.
Right? Oh my god.
Maybe another podcast.
Yeah, that's different topic. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for just coming on and having the conversations that we normally have anyway with microphones.
Yes. All of a sudden didn't change anything.
Yeah, exactly. No, really, but like, thank you for coming on. Thank you for being vulnerable. Thank you for sharing everything that you shared. I'm going to say this again and again and again on every single podcast. You know, I think that in being able to have the courage to speak to your own experiences gives people freedom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it gives people who are, because people deal with this all the time. People deal with coming out in whatever way that they're coming out, in whatever situation, whatever circumstances, with whatever people,
really
all the time.
Really
Really unique environments. And it's just like, if someone got something out of this that, you know, gives them hope or courage or freedom or power, or just to know that, like, hey, like, Elizabeth, Robert, and Timothy love you to pieces.
Yes.
Just like, we love you so much. Like, you've got this. We've got your back 100%. Like, we're your family.
Well, and if you ever need an encouraging word or an ally or just to vent or whatever, my Instagram is easily turned off, and I will be there for you.
And the infamous plug.
I will absolutely be there for you and give you a pep talk. It brings me joy, and yeah.
Would you like to plug anything, Robert?
Just call Elizabeth if you want to talk to me.
Oh, great. Now I'm going to get phone calls.
Is Robert there? Well, I don't have social media anymore.
You don't have social media anymore at all?
No.
Oh, well, I didn't know that.
It's a long. We had another podcast.
Okay, by the way, yeah, no, this is, maybe I'll cut this part out, but getting a hold of both of you at the same time is ridiculous. Like, P.S. I had to go through like 4 different channels just to communicate with the two of you to get you here today.
And bam, we're here. And you were 10 minutes early, just to be correct.
Yeah, you were. I was super impressed. You were early. I was just like, what is this? What's happening right now? And then you raided my kitchen. And I was like, oh, I get it. Okay.
You're hungry. Robert, pancakes. Got it.
Anyway, I love you both. Thank
love
you for
too.
being my friends and my family. I love you. I love you. I
Always.
love you so much. Thank you for listening to Love Dripping from the Walls. You can follow on Instagram or Facebook at Love Dripping from the Walls. Leave comments and questions, and I may share your thoughts on the podcast. Please rate and review on whatever platform you are listening on. If you want to support Love Dripping from the Walls, log on to the Anchor app and subscribe or give monthly donations. Keep listening and keep loving.